I'm going to be reading from Paul's second letter to the people of Corinth, or aka 2 Corinthians. I'll be reading from the 9th chapter, and so if you want to follow along, we'll be picking up with verse 6. The point is this, that one who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and the one who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each of you must give as you have made up your mind, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance, so that by always having enough of everything, you may share abundantly in every good work. As it is written, He scatters abroad, He gives to the poor. His righteousness endures forever. He who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way for your great generosity, which will produce thanksgiving to God through us. For the rendering of this ministry not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also overflows with many thanksgivings to God. Through the testing of this ministry, you glorify God by your obedience to the confession of the gospel of Christ, and by the generosity of your sharing with them and with others. While they long for you and pray for you because of the surpassing grace of God that He has given you. Thanks be to God for His indescribable gift. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Osceola McCarty was conceived the day that her mother was viciously attacked and assaulted on a country road in rural Mississippi. Little did anyone know that years later, we would be talking about her as one of the great and generous saints of the church. For the past 3 weeks now, we've been talking about saints. Stephen mentioned earlier, we were in the sermon series called Saints and Silver, talking about those who have provided a framework for how we might understand our lives as Christian believers and how we also might have generosity pour forth from us because of our conviction and our faith and our beliefs. And so we started off the sermon series by talking about this person here. Her name is Joan Delano. She was a French woman who, as you heard probably a couple weeks ago, if you participated in worship, was best known early on for taking the orphans and the poor who begged at her doorstep and sweeping them off with a broom. And later on, after a transformation and God softened her heart, she ended up taking in some of those same children and those same individuals and welcoming them into her home, later establishing housing and boarding housing for people who were in a transitional place in their life. And today that ministry continues on across the planet in various different homes for people in those kind of predicaments. The next week we heard from Stephen, who told us about this well-known saint, Saint Francis of Assisi. His story was a powerful one. He grew up with all kinds of means and wealth and power and prestige in the household he grew up in, but chose to reject that when he realized through a very pivotal moment that his life was being defined by his family's wealth and not through his relationship with God and with the community around him. And so he exchanged some of the most luxurious garments of his day for burlap and wore that instead, showing the world that he would not be defined by the wealth that accompanied his family name. So these first two people are actually people who are sainted in the Roman Catholic Church. It's easy to refer to them as saints. But now, today and next week, we move into the broader definition of the saints, and that is any believers within the church. So we are all counted among the registry of the saints in our tradition. But there's a couple of saints for this Sunday and next week that I want to highlight for you who may be lesser known. It's unlikely, I think, that they will ever be sainted by the Catholic Church, but I still want to mention them because I think that they have powerful stories. In fact, perhaps maybe every bit as strong in terms of their conviction of belief and faith, their generosity and their approach to finances, as the two who preceded them in our sermon series. And so, as I mentioned, today we're talking about this woman here. Her name was Oseola McCarty. And you heard the beginning, the tragic beginning of how her life started. And in 1908, she was born. Her mother, realizing that she could not care for her, entrusted her into the care of her grandmother and a favorite family aunt. And those three lived together. Now, Osceola, as a young girl, started going to school, but before she went to school every day, she would help in contributing to what her grandmother and her aunt did to help pay the bills. And what they did was that they cleaned homes, they did a lot of cooking for people in the community, and what Osceola would be most known for is her washing. And so from the time that she was 8 years old, she began each day, she says, first of all, on my knees, saying the Lord's Prayer. And then I would get up and get to work before the sun came up. She said I'd start a fire out in the yard, and then I would take a wash basin and I would go to the fire hydrant down the street. I would open the hydrant up, fill it with water, take it back to the fire, and beginning to get that water boiling. And then until 11 p.m. every day, she would wash, soap, scrub, starch, hang dry, and fold all of those clothes that she was caring for on a regular basis. She did this from the time that she was 8 years old. And it was expected that she would contribute to the finances of the family. I mean, they needed every bit to make it work. But Osceola was also permitted by her grandmother and her aunt to keep a little bit of the money. And so she went home, and with a penny in her pocket, she began to put them in her baby doll buggy. That's where she kept her money. That was her piggy bank. And she contributed to that and saved a little bit of money each time that she got some money from the work that she was doing. Well, one day when she was about 11 years old in 6th grade, her aunt fell ill. And her aunt came home from the hospital unable to walk again. And so at this point, Osceola knew that she needed to step up her contributions to bringing in some money at home. And so she dropped out of the 6th grade and became a full-time washerwoman, washing on a board like this each and every day. She did that from the time that she was 8 until she was 83 years old and finally retired. Every single day. When she was 11 and started to work full-time, she was bringing in more money, and she actually filled up her baby doll carriage. And so as an 11-year-old, she didn't know what she was doing, she confessed, but she gathered up all of her money and she went down to the bank in Hattiesburg because she was told by the community that that's what you did, that's where you put your money. So she went to the bank, she opened an account, and as an 11-year-old, she started banking there. She continued to put money in the bank each and every time that she got paid. And gradually, that savings grew and grew and grew. And so, by the time that she retired, her hands arthritic and no longer able to work, she stopped working and took a look at the money that she had in savings. She had amassed from her savings, starting off in the early 1900s, all that time, $280,000. That's what she had to live on for the rest of her days. And she looked at that amount of money and she said, that looks like more than enough. So she went in and took $150,000 of it, withdrew it from the bank, and took $150,000. Remember now, this is more than half of her life savings. And she also walked down the street a few blocks to the University of Southern Mississippi. She went into the office there and said, I would like to establish a scholarship for children who might not otherwise be able to attend college because they were not financially able to do so. And I want to establish a scholarship so that people like me could have the opportunity to get a college education. This is someone who has a 6th grade education and has established now a scholarship to put young people through college. It's a powerful story about her generosity. In retirement, she also decided that it was time that she took a vacation, the first one she had ever taken. So she took a very modest vacation where she went up and always wanted to see Niagara Falls. So she saw the falls, but every day that she was there, she longed to be back in Hattiesburg. She said she missed home and what was familiar. She missed the comforts of home. But the story goes that every day before she would go out on her sightseeing at the falls for the few days that she was there, she'd make up the bed in her hotel room and leave the room in perfect condition before she left for the day. She was interviewed by different media outlets who picked up on this story after the fact, and they said, "So, it's interesting that you went on vacation. I'm glad you got to do that, but don't you ever want to spend any more of the money on yourself? I mean, you gave so much of it to this scholarship fund. Don't you want to spend more money on yourself?" And she said, "I have spent the money on myself." And she wasn't talking about something else. She was talking about the scholarship. You see, what Osceola McCarty understood about her generosity in giving was that she saw that as such a blessing to be able to give to a scholarship fund that would put underserved people through college, that she saw that as a gift to herself. She took blessing and comfort and hope in the fact that she was able to contribute generously to help out somebody else in need. And that really, I think, is part of the point of what Paul is getting at when he is addressing the group of people in Corinth in this letter this morning that you just heard from. See, Paul hasn't been to Corinth yet at the time of this letter. This letter is going to arrive in anticipation of his arrival there. And he's been bragging up this community of Corinth to the other churches that are springing up around the region. The Macedonians, for instance, he says, "Listen, I've been telling the Macedonians just how faithful and good you are, and I told them about how last time I was in communication with you, you guys had promised that you were going to make a significant gift to the ministry of the church that we are talking about, that we are sharing in together." And he said, "But I haven't received that gift, and just so you know, before I come to town, I want you to make sure that that's still what you want to do." And that's where he gets into this language about, I don't want you to feel extorted in this. That's the word he uses in verse 5. I don't want you to feel extorted about this gift. I don't want you to feel under any obligation. I don't want this to be under compulsion. I don't want this to be under guilt. I want you to give because you want to give. I want you to give because it's joyful for you to be able to do so. I want you to give because it's fun, it's happy, it's exciting, it's meaningful. I want you to give because you believe in what you are supporting. And so that's sort of the words that he uses when he lays out what he hopes to do from them. He said, now, we're counting on the gift, but how you give it is important. It has to be a free will decision. It has to be your choice to give. Because if you are not giving it that way and you're giving under duress or out of guilt or obligation, this is not how God wants to receive this gift from you. God wants to receive the gift joyfully, with excitement on your part, as a blessing, or as Ms. McCarty would have said, it's such a joy to give that it feels like we are spending the money on ourselves. So this is the Sunday where we're going to talk about what happens next. We've been laying the groundwork now, talking about generosity, looking at generosity through the lens of some of these saints that we've talked about the past couple of weeks. But today, I want to talk to you about the letter that you received yesterday, or you will be receiving tomorrow. And if you are on our church mailing list and you have entered into the membership covenant here at the church, you have received this letter, or you will be getting it tomorrow in the mail. And the letter inside is a long letter from me. It talks about what I'm talking about today. But there's also this card inside. And this card, for those of you who have been through this process, is going to look very familiar in some ways because it just asks for your name on the front. It asks for your contact information. But the back side, where you fill out what your anticipated gift for the new year, is going to look a little bit different. You see, because while the Bible does not lay out how you should give in terms of this needs to happen as an obligation, but as a gift of joy, it does lay out how much you should give. And I know that this is the part where it gets a little bit uncomfortable and people squirm a little bit because we're talking about something that we've been taught is a taboo subject. But the Bible is pretty clear throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament that there is a biblical precedent for giving that is called a tithe. And a tithe is a word that in some Christian circles is synonymous with a gift. But that's not the same thing. A tithe in biblical terms is very specifically 10%. 10% of one's income. And so the biblical precedent, if we want to know how much we might give, is 10% of our income. Then we have this thing that we call offerings, which is different than the tithe. And the offerings are any gifts that we give financially over and above our tithe. So that's why when we talk about our tithes and offerings, we're not talking about the same thing. We're talking about the first 10%, and then we're talking about anything that goes after that 10%. So that's why when we say today we're taking a special offering to benefit the survivors of a hurricane, or we're taking it for this scholarship fund, or we're raising money to buy food for X cause, those are offerings. But that's above and beyond the tithe. Now, I know 10%, for those of you who have not tithed previously, sounds like a considerable amount of money. And let's be honest, it is. But we all know the difference between the times that we have given money towards something when we said, I can give that because I'm not going to feel it, right? There's that time where you have been at the restaurant and you have made the tip for $1 or $2 or $10 more than you would have otherwise done because you thought, I can do this. And odds are that person needs that money who's receiving the tip more than I do. That $10 will help them more than I will feel it. We've given that way before. And that's okay. But it's different when we give to the point that we notice it, that we feel it. 10% for most of us is within that range, right? That part where we feel it. Now, for some, that'll feel like a sacrifice. But it will certainly be noticeable when that amount of money is not in our bank account, right? But isn't that the kind of way, the spirit of giving that we should be in when we think about how we want to respond to God? Isn't it a marker that we shouldn't give to God like, it's probably better for the church to have this money than for me to have it, I won't miss it. That's not the attitude we're looking for. The gift that we give should be proportional to the joy that we feel and the impact that we have had because God is a part of our lives. If we have received blessings and God has opened doors and we have entered into relationships and we have been blessed by this church and by the ministries of the church and the ability to serve in the church and to worship here and extend our joy and support and love to the broader community and beyond our city but into the international community, if all that stuff matters to us, then isn't that something that we joyfully want to support and maintain and continue? These are things that we give to and we are able to give to joyfully because we believe that it matters. We believe that it makes a difference. And so with all that in mind, here's what's different about the backside of the card this year. It lists 2 different steps. And the first step asks you to check one of these boxes. And the first box says this. Here's the first option. We am going to be a first-time tither by offering 10% of my income in 2021. For many, this will be a huge step to make that commitment to tithing for the first time, truly tithing for the first time in the new year. The next one says, I am going to start giving 3% of my income in 2021. Obviously not the same as 10%, but here's the thing. For some of us, going from what we're giving now to 10% would feel borderline irresponsible. And I'm not saying this to look, to toot my own horn, okay? I am saying that I am a tither today because I started out with box number 2. Because I wanted to work toward a tithe, but I was not able to do that in my 20s. When I was first starting out in professional ministry, I couldn't do that and pay my bills. But it started off with 3%, and the next year we got to 5 or 6, and after that we got to 10, and we've stayed there since. So if this is a stair-step box to check, okay, this is with the intention that we start at this 1 percentage point and we're going to grow it from there. The third box is, I am going to offer blank percent. You fill in the blank. If you are on that incremental growth plan, you can put, I'm at 7%, I'm at 1%, I'm at 8.5%, whatever it is, wherever you find yourself. And the last one is, I am going to continue to give at or above 10% in 2021. That's for the people who are already tithing. And that's for the people who say, I might be able to move to 12%. Or I'm going to continue my tithe, but I want to go above and beyond that. And so this year I'm going to give extra attention to the offerings part of what I give that accompany my tithes. And then step 2, it says, therefore I am going to give blank dollars in 2021. And I plan to give that either weekly, one time, twice a month, quarterly, etc., right? I laid out the card this way this year because I want to be able to, as a congregation, as a church family, begin to move toward that biblical model of tithing. Because I believe that not only is it a wonderful response to the blessings we feel that God has offered us in our lives, but that I want to tell you that I found a different kind of level of peace around money in my life when I started becoming a tither. It wasn't about whether I was giving enough anymore. It wasn't about whether I was ashamed about what I give. Honestly, it made it quite a bit easier to talk about this with the churches that I was serving because I was able to say, I'm doing this too, and I'm not asking you to follow this biblical model that I myself and my household aren't practicing. But I want to tell you about the peace that I found when I did that. And it's not a transactional thing, though. As I said a couple of weeks ago, I don't want this to be confused as one of those things where, like the televangelist who says, send your money in and God will bless you tenfold. You're not going to see the money back. That's not how this works. But it is a peace that you will find. It is a satisfaction that you will find. It is a hope that you will find. It is a joy that you will find when you give as a cheerful giver, because now you are giving what you believe God is encouraging you and giving you the opportunity to do. And that's a change of mindset. That's a change of life. And I want to tell you, I found peace in that. And I have yet to hear of anyone who moved into the tithing category who ever said, I can't do it anymore, I want to scale back, barring a catastrophic situation in their life. I'm not offering this as a challenge. I'm not offering this as something that I want you to feel guilty about or an obligation. I want you, like Paul says, to do this because you want to respond joyfully to the ways that you have seen God at work in your life, in the life of this church. And because those things mean so much to you, you can't help but give generously and joyfully in response. So Paul says this. He says, if you scatter a few seeds, you're going to grow some crops. If you scatter an abundance of seeds, there will be an abundance of crops. And guess what happens when you scatter an abundance of seeds? More crops grow, which yield more seeds in return, which you are able then to plant a bigger planting the next time around, and people take notice. Or as one biblical commentator put it, he said it's like one person who sings a joyful song is kind of alone. But as soon as a second person joins in and starts to sing a harmony, now people start paying attention. And before you know it, you have a choir. And that's what happens when it comes to financial generosity as well. The joy that you will experience and the joy that you will share will be infectious. And that's exactly what happened with Osceola McCarty. So I told you she gave $150,000 to Southern Miss, which is huge. But let's be honest, 150 grand doesn't go very far when it comes to college tuition from generation to generation, right? I mean, that's putting a couple of kids through school. But what happened was, when the university announced that they had received this gift, all of a sudden all of these business leaders and people with the means all around Hattiesburg who heard her story said, well, I want to contribute to that scholarship that Osceola put in place. And so now all of a sudden, this snowballed and it grew many times over. And now today, many kids go through on the Osceola McCarty Scholarship at Southern Miss every year, and it will continue to go well beyond her lifetime, which it already has. Not only did Hattiesburg notice and the community there, but she got her story written up in the New York Times. And Ted Turner read that story, the media mogul, and he said, if that washerwoman can give $150,000 to charity, then certainly I could give $1 billion. And he did. The stories of these saints, the stories of generosity that is accompanied with our faith, have that infectious quality. They compel others to be generous. They remind us to live lives of gratitude. They remind us what it means to live cheerfully and to live a life of grace-filled abundance and not under a fear of scarcity. And what it does is it transforms each and every one of these lives in the process. And it has that ability for us as well. And I'll leave you with these words one more time from the Apostle Paul, who ended that chapter this way. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. The gift that God offers us in our generosity is so great, he says, that in essence, it's indescribable. I invite you to experience that indescribable feeling too, through the generosity that we will share now through the remainder of the year, carrying us through this pandemic, into the rest of 2021, and into the decade ahead, which we look forward to with anticipation, excitement, and joy as cheerful givers.